Two, one. Hey everyone, and welcome to our second online Global Voices. Today I have a very special guest with us. This is Chris Granberry. He and his wife Mary and their kids have been doing ministry in the state of Seattle among the Yakama people for a long time now. He is from this general area. Actually, I can't remember where you're originally from. Are you originally from Birmingham?
Yeah, I grew up just south of Birmingham in the Vestavia, Rocky Ridge area.
Okay. And you said you went to Samford as well?
Yeah, that's right. I went to Briarwood High School and then went to Samford for college.
All right. So this is an alum. Go Bulldogs. Great to see the guy continues to send people out from our school to do some really special things. So tell us a little bit about just your life before moving to Washington.
Yeah, when I was in college, I studied education and English and phys ed, and I was right out of school. I was a teacher and a coach for 4 years, and then went into youth ministry at Oak Mountain Presbyterian for about 7 years, and I really loved that. I loved Oak Mountain, loved working with Bob Flahart and the other guys there, ladies there. Loved doing youth ministry. Was really passionate about it and didn't really expect anything to change. I was trying to figure out, how I could keep doing that for a long time. But in the guys and girls from our youth group here to the Yakama Indian Reservation in South Central Washington State, to a little town called White Swan. And we came to serve. We were roofing and painting homes and working with children in the housing projects. And the reason I chose this location, as far as I knew, was because I wanted my students to have a truly cross-cultural experience. I wanted them to be interacting with and serving people who were in true poverty. And all of that was happening here. I thought that the experience would have a big impact on the students, and it did, but it obviously had a bigger impact on me. The short version of the story is that the children that we were working with in the housing projects on the reservation stole my heart that summer, and I've never been the same ever since. And that's true. So, but also we were working on a lady's home. We roofed it and painted it. And she was real nervous and standoffish the whole time we were there. And we didn't get to interact with her at all, which really bothered me. Because somebody had said, when you go out and you do mercy ministry, if you're not doing it in the name of Christ, you're not sharing the gospel as well, then you might be simply making somebody comfortable on their way to hell. And that was rolling around in my head when we were working on our house, because there was no church in town. There was really no Christian presence, nobody to follow up with her after we left. And I knew we were the last team that was going to be in town for the year. So they were about to go 50 weeks with no Christian interaction, as far as I could tell. And that really bothered me a lot. And I was praying about it a lot. And the very last day we had finished working on her house, she had a new roof, a new paint job, all the weeds were knocked down and her grass was mowed, and we picked up all the trash, and it looked like a little miniature extreme home makeover. And all of my students and leaders were loaded up in vans. We were about to pull out and fly out of Portland back to Alabama, and still had no significant interaction with this lady in the house. And I walked around the house one more time to make sure that we weren't leaving anything behind. And I was halfway across the front yard to the van when I heard a noise behind me, and it was the lady from the home. And she was running to catch me, and she had tears streaming down her face. And she said, "Why would you guys do this for me?" She said, "You don't even know me. and you paid for the plane tickets, you paid for the paint, you paid for the shingles, you did all this work on my house for free. She said, my own family wouldn't do this for me. Why would you do it? And I had an opportunity to share the gospel with her. And what I told her was, you know, God provided all the money we needed to buy the plane tickets and the shingles and the paint. And God handpicked everybody on this team and gave everybody this desire to come and do this. And God picked your house. We believe God wanted us to come and do this and to share his love with you in a real tangible way that is a constant reminder. You know, whenever you see the house, hopefully you'll remember not so much that we care, but we do, but remember beyond that, he cares. And I said, but there's an even better story that's behind all of this. And that's that Jesus left his home in heaven, which is way better than Alabama. And he came to earth for a lifetime, not just a week. And he did the work that only he could do so that we could become the children of God. And he lived and he died on the cross. He rose again. I was able to share the gospel with her. And I said, and even beyond that, now he's gone to heaven again, where he says he's preparing a place for us that'll never need a new roof. It'll never need a new paint job. And that's the future that we have to look forward to. And that's the story we wanted to share with you in the midst of working on your home. And I wish I could say that she fell on her knees and prayed to receive Christ in her front yard. She didn't. But a native lady did stand there with tears in her eyes and listen to a random white guy from Alabama talk about Jesus. And that moment had a huge impact on me, because I've been convinced from then till now that that's what needs to happen in Native America. Is Native people need to experience the love of Christ through believers in very tangible and evident ways. And then they need to hear the gospel in that context. And so that 1 week trip,
wow,
had a huge impact on me, and went back to Alabama where nothing had changed, but everything was different, and could not stop thinking about this little town of White Swan and the children I had met and this lady and some of the other adults I met. I could not get everything out of my head. And it took about 1.5 years, but God finally convinced me he was actually calling me to move my wife and 4 small kids from Birmingham to the reservation. And we moved out here in 2003. And I don't remember what your question was. Hopefully I answered it.
I don't either. I just feel like I should go ahead and close in prayer right now. That's amazing. Before we talk about some of the needs, and you've sat in my office and described some of the needs that in a way that I still remember pretty vividly. But before that, tell me what you love about the people. What do you love about the people?
Man. Wow. Well, there's a lot to love. And I'll be honest, I was not a huge fan of all things Native American before we moved to the reservation. Like some people just love everything about Native American culture and on and on and on. And I really wasn't one of those folks. I had kind of a deep admiration for what I knew about Native people in terms of, like 200 years ago here, the average Native man and woman probably could walk off into the wilderness basically and live off the land with weapons they made themselves and fishing gear they made themselves. They could live indefinitely and provide for their family with their own 2 hands in the wilderness. And these mountains, the Cascades, for example, if you spend a little bit of time in the Cascades, to me, they're not a lot like the Smokies. Like when I go to the Smoky Mountains, I tend to think, oh, this is so cozy and beautiful and comfortable. The Cascades are trying to kill you. And so these folks around here, I mean, they could live in -16 degree weather or it gets up to 112 in the summertime around here. It's just very extreme territory, and they could live indefinitely off the land and provide for themselves and others. And it's kind of like, the ultimate redneck dream, and I had a lot of admiration for that. But there was a lot I didn't understand about Native culture and about Native religion and where people were really coming from. And I wasn't enamored with all things Native, so to speak. But what I love, off the top of my head, what I love about people here, amazingly, the first thing I guess that popped into my head is the sense of humor that Native people have. And it's really a survival mechanism at this point. If you live on the reservation, you need to learn how to have a good sense of humor, or else you'll just cry all the time. And so Native people are really fun to be with, and they're really funny, especially if you are a white person and you're willing to laugh at white people and at yourself, because Native people are really good at laughing at themselves. And once you understand the culture and the place and where people are coming from, there's a lot of laughter and there's a lot of celebration. There's a lot of gratitude to the Creator, even if somebody doesn't understand a biblical view of God. The Native understanding of who God is in terms of Creator, there's a lot of gratitude for what people have. And so they're much more prone to celebrate what they've got than to cry about what they've lost. And so gratitude is a big thing to admire and to learn from the people here. The generosity and the hospitality of people on the reservation is pretty shocking to most non-Native people. They have taken me and my family in, and we are part of the community and considered family by people who have every right to think of us as the original terrorists. And so that's shocking, the hospitality and the generosity. I've been given gifts by people that the gift was the equivalent of 20% of their annual income, say. So it's astounding, the generosity and the lack of materialism that you see among healthy Native people is extremely humbling too. So it's true that they are a very spiritual people. Another thing that's a thrill is to see Native people respond to Jesus when they understand who Jesus is and what he's done for us. Their response is similar to what you might see among Messianic Jews.
And so you mentioned to me before that you were told by a lot of experts that Native Americans will not respond to the gospel.
Right. Yeah. When we signed up to come here and it became official, and then word started to get around, I don't even know why word got around, but it did. And people came out of the woodwork to tell us not to come. I had one of the most striking conversations was a man probably about 50 years old at that time, which was about 20 years ago. He was very aggressive with me. He had grown up on an Indian reservation in California, and his dad had been a pastor. So I felt like maybe I was talking to my son, 45 years down the road, which was a horrifying thought, because this guy said, don't you dare move your wife and kids to the reservation. He said the church has been trying to reach Native Americans for 150 years, 200 years, depending on where you go, 400 years by some standards. And it's been a miserable failure. Native Americans are not interested in the gospel. They have rejected Jesus and scripture, and they are not going to respond to you and to your family. He said, you may live there. You may live on the reservation. He said, you probably won't last 2 years, but if you do, it'll be 8 years before you have a decent conversation with anybody in the community. And even if you live there 20 years, you'll never be accepted. You'll always be an outcast. You'll always be shunned in the community. Nobody wants you there. And he could tell he wasn't persuading me because by then we were already thoroughly convinced God wanted us to come. Mm-hmm. But we were wondering, is this some sort of kamikaze mission? You know, like, is this a suicide mission, basically? So he could tell he wasn't convincing me. So he got even more intense. And he said, I'm going to tell you, those Native Americans, they're going to chew you up and spit you out, and your wife and kids too. Don't you dare move out there. Wow. And that was basically the end of the conversation. So that was the kind of thing we were hearing from people who had grown up on reservations. Right. And yeah, it was pretty scary. Another thing that had happened a couple of years before we moved here is there's a Methodist church in town. And I'm not sure, I don't really think that the gospel was extremely present there in their preaching, etc. But they had a female pastor who had upset some other ladies in the community while working in the food bank. I think the pastor lost her temper and fussed at some of the ladies or something. And a few days later, her house burned down in the middle of the night. And thankfully, she and her husband were not there, but the house was gone. And so I thought, if a female Methodist pastor offended people that deeply, you know, how bad am I going to offend folks when I show up? And so it was a scary thing to think about doing, moving my family here.
So let's kind of get the setting a little bit more. I want to ask the next couple of questions, but for the sake of time, probably needs to be as neat as possible.
Okay.
Describe the problems that you encounter on the reservation, and describe the history of why you encountered these problems that weren't prevalent 100, 200 years ago, and that interaction with white Americans.
Yeah, great questions. Well, let's see. There's a lot of statistics I could throw out there. The life expectancy on our reservation among enrolled Yakama Nation members is about 39 years old.
Okay, stop right there, because you told me that years ago in my office, and I was stunned. And so I went to find statistics, and I went to every country in Africa. I couldn't find a single country in Africa that had life expectancy that low.
Yeah, Angola is close, I think. If they're still, last I knew, they were in the midst of a civil war. And I think the life expectancy was 40 or 41, but I could be wrong about that. But yeah, I think the life expectancy in Pakistan, for example, is 41. So yeah, it's extremely low. And beyond that, the community we're serving is on the western end of the reservation. So we're serving an area of about 2,500 square miles. And in our area, the life expectancy is more like 36. And it's probably lower than that for Native men. So honestly, there have been days here where I felt like people were inventing new ways to die. I remember one day in particular, I had just learned of a toddler, 2.5 years old, I think, who had pulled a TV off a stand onto his head, and it killed him. And a few days earlier, a man had been backing out of his driveway to go to work and ran over his 3-year-old by accident and killed that child. And so there's drug overdoses, there's suicide. Suicide is sky high on the reservation. There's diabetes, heart disease, domestic violence is rampant. Native women are 7 or 8 times more likely, according to the FBI, to be sexually assaulted than any other ethnicity in the United States. According to the FBI, the most dangerous person to be in the United States is a Native American male. So the person most likely to die a violent death in America is a Native American male. So obviously alcohol is a huge problem, drunk driving. I mean, I could go on and on. It's, yeah. So sexual abuse, child abuse, neglect, elder abuse is sky high. I mean, it's all the above. So the man that gave me an Indian name is my native father. He says, he's an elder in the tribe. He says anything good, if you look at the socioeconomic indicators for Native America, anything that's good for you, Native American people will be at the bottom of the list, and anything that's bad for you, they'll be at the top of the list. And in every single thing I've ever looked at, that's true. There was even a book written by a professor from Michigan who did a study on the death rates or the death certificates on the Yakama Reservation. And he wrote a book about it. It's called Death Stalks the Yakama. Came out back in the early 90s. And so sometimes when I'm talking about it, it just sounds like surely it can't be that bad, but it actually is. It really is that bad. When you ask the question, why, what happened historically to cause things to go so wrong on the reservation where we are, and it's similar to most other reservations. Here, I can speak more clearly about this place in particular. I don't know about every single there's 550 reservations in the United States, and each one has its own culture and its own history. And there's a lot of overlap, but here, the treaty was signed with the federal government in 1853. And what happened was I think the main thing that happened immediately is essentially that the Native American leaders and the Native American men in particular were essentially emasculated by the signing of the treaty, because the treaty says that the Yakama people are wards of the state, and that the Great White Father, the president back then, is going to feed them, clothe them, educate them, house them, provide for their medical care, and all the above. Now, the treaty has never been kept for a single day, but that's what the Native people here have been fighting for ever since they signed that treaty, is to be wards of the state, which of course is something I would not want to be, but that's what they essentially aspire to at this point, because that was the promise that was made to them. But all of a sudden, at the signing of the treaty, and the leaders were told after some negotiation, attempted negotiation, they were told, the bottom line is you sign this document or by sundown, you'll be knee deep in the blood of your women and children. That was Stevens, the future governor of the state of Washington, who told them that. So one of the primary chiefs was Kamayakan. He was biting his bottom lip so hard that he had blood running down his chin when he signed the treaty, because he knew if he spoke, he would get everybody killed. And years later, he said, we should have just fought and died rather than to live like this on the reservation. But the men were made obsolete immediately. And then right on the heels of that, alcohol was introduced. The men were unnecessary because the federal government said, we will protect you, we will provide for you, we will feed you, we will clothe you. So these ultimate protectors and providers that they had been, all of a sudden couldn't protect and provide for their families, and they were obsolete, and they checked out. The men shortly after checked out, and essentially they've been gone ever since. Maybe 1 out of 10 men stick around in this community. And so as a result, for the last 100 years or so, children grow up with no fathers. They never even meet their fathers. Another thing that happened right on the heels of this, about 20 years later, is that the federal government began to build boarding schools where they forcibly took 5-year-old children away from their homes and took them hundreds of miles away to boarding schools. And they stayed in those schools 12 months out of the year until they were 18 or 19 years old. And the goal of the school, the stated goal, was to kill the Indian to save the child. So that it was forcibly remove children from their homes and separate them from their culture and from their people to make them productive citizens. But you had to take away their culture and their sense of identity as Native people in order to save them, was the mindset. So you had to take a child, kill the Indian to save the child, was the mindset of the people that ran these schools. Sadly, virtually every denomination in the United States participated in that. So you had Baptist boarding schools, Catholic boarding schools, Presbyterian boarding schools, Methodist boarding schools, etc. And they tried to force assimilation. They tried to force children to assimilate into mainstream American culture. And what you wind up with is a huge identity crisis in Native America. And that's part of the reason that man said they don't want anything to do with the white man's religion or Christianity, because that's part of the history. So I think between the signing of the treaty, making the men obsolete, and the forcibly trying to force people to assimilate into mainstream American culture and many times Christianity, a tremendous amount of damage was done to the indigenous people who were here. So
there's no mystery then, if you're listening to this, why there are obstacles to the gospel, why there are obstacles in particular to the gospel coming from white people. So with those barriers, how did that impact your philosophy of ministry? How did it impact your desire to contextualize the gospel into their culture instead of simply trying to bring our culture again?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of the philosophy of ministry that we had coming into this was shaped, especially by Isaiah 58, verses 6 through 12. And in essence, it says, if you boil it down, it pretty much says, as a child of God, as somebody that belongs to the family of God, you have been given resources. You may have knowledge, you may have energy or healthy body or some skill set or money or whatever you have as a child of God. Look at the world around you and see things that are not the way they ought to be. And then take whatever resources you have and try to apply them to that need as effectively as you can in order to set it right. So we started asking ourselves, what would that look like in this community? And for example, doing children's ministry, we go to the housing projects. The children are often bored. They often don't have an adult in their life that really pays attention to them very much or listens to them. They don't even have access most of the time to crayons and coloring books. or, they don't have anybody to play with them or read a book to them, or just spend time with them. And so we looked at that situation. We said, well, that's not right. That's not the way it ought to be. So let's go to Walmart and get some coloring books and bubbles and crayons and sidewalk chalk and a kickball. And let's go to the housing projects and do kids club and just play with kids and listen to kids and read books and sit down and color with them or do a craft or whatever, and just love on them. Let's just momentarily, at least for an hour or two, let's pretend that this kid right in front of me is my kid. And what would I do right now if this was my son or my daughter? I'm going to try to love them the best I can right here, right now. And I don't know what's going to happen later today. I don't know what's going to happen next week. I don't know what I can do beyond, but I only have this moment. And I do have the ability to go sit in the dirt with this kid and read him a book. And we started doing that from day one, that sort of thing. And pretty soon the grandmothers started to trust us and come to us because we loved their grandkids and they loved their grandkids. So even though I was a random white guy from Alabama, all of a sudden we had something in common. And so the grandmothers started coming and asking for help. And they would say, can you come mow my grass because somebody stole my lawnmower? And I'm in trouble with the housing authority because my grass is too tall. And so I said yes to every single opportunity to do something like that. And what I tried to do, one thing I picked up on early on was that in Native country, actions speak much louder than words. And so I tried to speak softly and serve like crazy and do jobs that nobody else wanted to do. So I was mowing grass, hauling trash, holding kids that had dirty diapers or runny noses or lice, and just trying to love people like family every possible opportunity we had. And my wife did it too. And even my kids joined in from day one. My youngest was only 5 years old, but we would take the kids to a kids club and I would tell my son, David, I'd say, find a kid that's about 2 years younger than you are, try to make sure that they're safe and that they have fun. And if you get a chance to tell them about Jesus, you can do that too. And so my kids from day one joined in, and they believed they were called to be missionaries here just as much as mom and dad were. And that's a huge blessing that God worked that into their hearts. So we basically have tried to love people like family every opportunity we had. And people started to respond right away like family, which makes sense. We didn't know that was going to happen, but it makes sense when you think, well, this is a tribal culture. It's a collectivist culture. So when you treat somebody like family, they almost feel obligated to love you back like family. And so right away, contrary to what the expert told us about being rejected forever and all that, the very first summer we were here, we got invited to traditional feasts. We got invited to birthday parties and family get-togethers. And all of a sudden, people were treating us like family, which also meant sometimes we got chewed out because we didn't know the cultural rules. And so, sometimes somebody would get after us because we're acting like we're 3 years old culturally because we didn't know what we were doing. But that's how you learn too.
You're in a situation where there's not a whole lot of people to orient you. Whereas someone goes to China to be a missionary, there's going to be a lot of orientation in terms of culture, language, and don't do this and do that.
Yeah, we had to learn it the hard way almost completely. And thankfully, we went through training at Mission Training International in Colorado. And they told us, they said, if you meet somebody in your future community, in your host community, that is willing to tell you what the hidden rules are in the culture, don't you dare stifle that person. You need to welcome that. That means don't have a nervous breakdown and cry, and don't get angry and fuss at somebody because they're fussing at you. You need to recognize that's a gift because they're going to only tell you as much as you can handle. And so that your cultural intelligence is only going to grow as long as you're willing to be reprimanded and you willingly accept it and invite it. And let me tell you, if you move into Native America and you represent the dominant culture, and you invite people to tell you what they don't like about the dominant culture, you're about to take a sip out of a fire hydrant. And frankly, you probably ought to go ahead and be a Calvinist and believe in total depravity, because you're about to. So we called it taking our spankings, and we've everybody on staff here now, we're all on the same page that Native people have been force-fed a whole lot of lies and a whole lot of garbage and a whole lot of horrible stuff for hundreds of years now. And we need to be willing to consume some stuff too, if we're going to have a relationship. We have to be willing to take it on the chin sometimes, if we expect to have any credibility with the people here. Also, it's a defense mechanism. Sometimes somebody will push you and say, if you're going to leave, leave now. So as believers, we need to be tough. I mean, we need to have a thick skin, and we need to be willing to take some hard things, because the people here, the 5-year-olds here, have been through a lot of hard things, and they've heard a lot of hard things that worse than I've heard, and seen a lot of things. So if they have to endure it, we can't expect for it to be better for us.
And of course, Jesus came and endured all kinds of things for the sake of us.
Yeah.
I mentioned contextualization, and you told me
Yeah.
previously, I want to get back to something you said.
Yeah.
You were given an Indian name. Tell us about that.
Yeah.
And what's the significance of
Yeah.
it?
Well, one thing I'll mention about contextualization that was really helpful, and then I'll talk to you about my Indian name too, but Galatians 5:6 has really helped us with contextualization. And of course, the issue that Paul was dealing with was circumcision. So he told the Galatians, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision has any value. The only thing that counts is faith expressing itself in love. And we have run a lot of things through that grid. So we will say neither going to a powwow or not going to a powwow has any value. That's not the real issue. The only thing that counts is faith expressing itself in love. So then we say, okay, if we exercise faith and love for God first and foremost, and then love for our neighbor also, does that look like going to a powwow or not? Like, do we need to take a stand right here because this doesn't glorify God, and it would be unloving to God for us to go? Or does it look like you can go and try to understand the culture and learn what you can, and maybe you're not seen as participating even though you're there? And so we ran everything through that grid in terms of contextualization, and that's been a really helpful tool for us. And I can't go on and on about it, but my Indian name is Mool Mool, which is an onomatopoeia word that was given to me by the elder that I mentioned. And Mool Mool, it's supposed to sound like water bubbling up out of the ground, like an artesian spring. And it's actually a location on this end of the reservation where it's a spot called Mool Mool, where the water bubbles up out of the ground. And it's essentially like an oasis, because we live on the dry side of Washington. So we only get 8 inches of rain a year. So here it's sagebrush and tumbleweeds. And that place was a really special place because when you went there, obviously you found water, but you also found game and food. You also found shade because there's great big cottonwood trees that grow up all around that spring like an oasis. You also found friends and family members that would gather there quite often. And from that spot, they would go hunting and engage in other cultural activities, food gathering of various sorts. But Wendell gave me this Indian name because he said, I see Jesus bubbling out of you and your people the way the water flows at Muamul. And
that is amazing.
So that name has really become a prayer request.
Yeah.
And I'm shy about sharing it, but I need to. In the traditional culture, they say don't be backwards. And that means I need to go ahead and share what my Indian name is. But I'm so humbled by it that I'm hesitant to share it. But that is a great thing to pray for me and my wife and the rest of our staff team and now our church, is that we would be like Muamul. We would be a place where the living water flows freely and people find sustenance. They find living water, and they find the bread of life, and they find shelter from a harsh world, and they find friends and family when they come to church. And that's what we want our church to be like. And so y'all can pray that we will all live up to my name. And since it is a collectivist culture, the name is not just for me, it's for me and my people. So Wendell kind of views me as some sort of chief. And so all of my tribe is called to live up to that name. So that's a great thing to pray for us.
Wow. Okay, so we didn't really talk about like the founding of the church, and honestly, we have other things that we do need to talk about. But by God's grace, you were able to establish a church years ago. Mm-hmm. Now there's full-blown ministry there. People come in and out all the time for use volunteers very well. As a matter of fact, it's because of this that you are one of our partners for the cross-cultural ministry practice for Beeson Divinity School. If you're a student here for the MDiv program, you're going to go somewhere minimum 2 weeks and serve alongside someone that's going to mentor you. And so what I appreciate so much is not just the ministry they're allowed to take part in, but the fact that you and Mary and others have mentored our students who have come there. And so so one question would be, since there are Beeson students who will be watching this who have not done their CCMP yet, and one or two students who are considering Beeson, what kind of things would they do if they were to join you?
Yeah, that's great. We are very much set up to host short-term workers. So we bring in 1 week teams between here and the other reservation in Oregon, the Warm Springs Reservation. We host about 450 people every year on a normal year, not during COVID, but we also have summer interns. We have a summer staff of about 25 people that come out. The reason we do this is because we know that Native America, the people here, need the church, and the church in America needs Native people as well. So we're trying to start a much larger and deeper conversation between believers in the United States and Native people here on the reservation, now many of whom are believers, and we want to foster those relationships and build a bridge between the church in America and Native America. The church needs Native American people as well. We're missing part of our body because only about 2 to 5% of Native people claim to be Christian. So after 400 years of trying on some level or another, we have not succeeded in effectively sharing the gospel with Native America. So in a variety of different ways, that's what the students from Beeson do. They come in and they do mercy ministry. So they're helping us with roofing and painting and hauling trash and knocking down weeds. They help with children's ministry. They help with youth ministry. We have a youth group with about 200 students in it here on the reservation. Children's ministry, we work with hundreds of children on a typical week, maybe 350 or so in 1 week in the summertime. So lots and lots of opportunities to do outreach and share the gospel, to serve in very tangible ways and share the love of God in very visible ways. They learn a lot about the culture. If somebody's interested in cross-cultural missions, or church planting, or youth ministry, discipleship, outreach, mercy ministry, community development. All those things are happening here. We have 21 people on staff now, and 11 of those people are native people. And so there's a lot of conversation and growth that goes on in terms of living and working cross-culturally. Also, there's no language barrier. Everybody here speaks English. And so communication is not a problem, which is a big benefit. And then also you would be interacting with people that come on a 1-week team for at least 1 week. If you come for 2 weeks, if you come longer, it'll be more. So you meet believers from all over the country, and even other countries. The last summer, a year ago, we had Chinese nationals who were visiting family members in Seattle who came over for a week to work on the Indian reservation, and they didn't speak English, but they loved on kids at Kids Club, and they worked on people's homes, and we were interacting with people from China on an American Indian reservation, which was pretty amazing. But we've had interns from Australia and Finland, and people from other countries come, and other nationalities. A lot of different multicultural churches in Seattle that come out to work with us. So you get to experience a lot.
I've talked with people from multiple churches in the Birmingham area who have either been there or gone there regularly. So what would you say briefly for other churches, not just the Birmingham area, but just anywhere in the States? You know, what kind of opportunities would they have?
Oh, yeah. The same sorts of things. We need people to come for a week at a time. We need summer interns every summer. We need people that can sign up and come work with us for a year or even longer. We are looking for full-time people. We're wanting to reach out to other reservations. So the community we're working in here is called White Swan. It's just one community. In Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, there's about 120 native communities like this one, and probably only about 10 healthy churches out there. So we desperately need more believers to come and work with us in a variety of different ways. It's essentially like reaching out to unreached people groups in these small little pockets that are tucked away outside of mainstream America. We meet people every summer who've never heard of Jesus before. And so there's opportunities to serve in those sorts of ways. So yeah, a lot of mercy ministry, roofing, painting, building wheelchair ramps, cutting and delivering firewood for elderly people. We mostly serve widows and orphans, honestly, but also single moms and low-income families. It's real basic. One of my friends who's a pastor in Seattle says there's nothing innovative about it. It's all grassroots, basic food, shelter, loving on kids, loving on widows, straightforward, getting your hands dirty kind of ministry.
All right. Well, it's time for us to wrap up, but I will first say to you, I will see you soon. Chris has been asking me to come for years, and this is a good summer. I actually, through Samford, I can't go anywhere internationally, so I have no excuses now. Actually, I did have other options within the States, but I thought, no. I need to get up to Washington. So I will see you soon. And for everyone else, thank you so much for joining us with Global Voices today.
Thank you, guys.